I am 1000% going to cry during this conversation. That's what I need to warn you all about, because I'm sitting here with two people who I love and admire so much and am like, I need a t-shirt to mark how big of a fan I am of you guys, especially right now, because it's such a big time in your lives and in your work. I'm sitting here with my dear friend, Mariko Clark Straighten, whichever you want to pick, Mariko Clark, and Rachel Eleanor. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hooray!
Thank you. The t-shirt can be arranged. Thank you for the feedback.
I really
we'll be in
would.
Merchland soon.
Can it be like, I love Marri and Rachel? Also, like I belong could be cute. Okay, we're getting off track. Daniel, cut this out. You guys, for people who haven't met you yet, tell us who you are, what you do, and a fun fact about yourself. Marri, I'm going to have you go first because it's nice to have someone like point in your direction. Marri,
Sure. I am Mariko Clark Straighten. I think I've introduced myself on the show as that before. I wrote mine down because every time I'm on this show, I'm like, who am I? I am a mom. I am an author, and I am a storyteller. I have a book coming out in September that we're going to talk about. I equip kids and caregivers with spiritual resources to navigate the messy middle, wrestle with tough questions, and find community in the journey. That's my little blurb.
I love it. Good job.
Thank you.
Marri, what's your fun fact?
I told Steph I have to redeem myself because I think the last time I interviewed, I talked about my armpits and which one smells more. Why did I do that? So now I have probably less of a fun fact and more of an anecdote. This is more of like an anecdote / parenting hack. When we were little, my parents would drive us. I lived in Massachusetts, and they would drive us all the way to Connecticut and stay at this random Marriott that had a pool and a breakfast buffet, which all parents know is crucial when you're taking kids traveling. But they would make a huge deal out of it and be like, we're going to the Marriott. And we would have to dress up. I would wear like my fancy Christmas dress to dinner. And they had us fully convinced that we were staying in capital T, capital M, the Marriott. Like we thought it was the only one in the world. There was one in my hometown. There was a Marriott, but I didn't know that. And they would drive us 2.5 hours to this one in the other state to make it feel special. And we would stay for a weekend. That was like my family just didn't have a lot of money growing up. So that was like, they made it special in that way. And it truly, I tell you guys, I was in, I think, high school when I found out that Marriott is literally like just a hotel chain. Because I would be like, wait, you've stayed at the Marriott? My family stays there.
That is an excellent parenting hack.
And I remember thank you. I remember my brothers and I, there's like a breakfast buffet. And like people would wake up and come to the breakfast buffet like in their pajamas. Like that's what you do when you stay at a hotel. My brothers and I would be in like formal wear and be like, what are these commoners doing in their pajamas? Like these peasants. Like we were just like shocked. Like who dresses like that at the Marriott? We could not believe it.
I will never get over this.
Someone hungover and just dragging themselves to the breakfast.
Right, and there's this table of like very well-dressed children just giving you the stink eye.
I must implement this immediately. This is amazing. This is
so
amazing.
When you're done, traveling Europe, there's a hack for you.
That is so wholesome.
Yes. That's
precious.
I love that so much. Rachel, tell us who you are, what you do, and a fun fact about yourself.
Hey everyone, I'm Rachel Eleanor, and I'm an illustrator. I draw pictures for a living. I like to say that with my work, I like to delight and disarm. And so I might do something whimsical and fun and cuddly and then sucker punch you talking about some tougher topics like mental health or, that the world's on fire, things like that.
Things like that.
And I really love to dive into topics about spirituality. And I like to think of myself as my drawings as friendly companions on your own way through the wilderness. And that's what drawings sort of become for me. Pictures as pilgrimage. It's a way to draw my way into distant lands. Inside and out. My fun fact is that I actually got to go to some distant lands on an actual pilgrimage like last week. So I've been writing and drawing about pilgrimage as a concept for a while. And then I went on a, fun fact, Jane Austen pilgrimage in Bath, England. And I just got back. And it was
you
so
have
amazing.
kind of a like literary like England glow about you. Like you can
yes, it's the deep pallor. It's actually natural to me, but
no, that's me. No, that's
really
me.
offset.
That's me. I think it's maybe the cute glasses and the headband, but I'm like, yes.
Thank you. Yeah. So I just got back from frolicking through the English countryside, a la Jane Bennett. And then I went on this pilgrimage with a bunch of other fabulous people to work on spiritual practices, but working with a secular text. So lovely. So it was a bunch of just Jane Austen fans, and we all talked about Northanger Abbey and wandered through Bath and took classes, and we're nerds together. And yeah, it was just the best.
That is the best. That is so awesome.
So cool, Rachel.
So you guys, you mentioned you have a new book coming out. And to say that I'm excited for this book is like the world's largest understatement. I have been looking forward to this book ever since Marri, you first, like it was like a twinkle in your eye. And I was like, I need that. I need that for me. I need that for my kids. I'm so, so excited about this. And I can't believe this, but I just got my copy. And for anyone who's on the YouTubes, like this is the most beautiful book I've ever seen. Like it absolutely is. It is so beautiful inside and out. And I'll never get over it. And so I want to talk to you guys about the book and about the content and about how it came to be, because I've had the privilege of getting to be kind of on the inside, like for this journey and getting to know about the ups and the downs and all that went into it. I mean, so much goes into anything that anyone creates, but I know the full story of what's gone into this. And I want to talk to you guys about the full story because I know that even if it's not a children's Bible, I know that everyone has something that they're thinking about doing or a problem that they see that they want to solve or, something they dream of. And they're running into obstacles along the way, or they feel like, man, I don't know if I'm like good enough to do this. And I know that you guys have run into obstacles and had doubts about yourself along the way. And so as you guys are like stepping into this massive, like career peak, not like total peak, but like first of very many, many, many great, super tall peaks. But as you're like stepping into this peak, I just would hate for anyone to see it and go, oh, well, like, of course that they could make something like this, but I couldn't. Because I'm like, no. This wasn't easy. This wasn't clean. And so let's talk about that. But to start out, tell us, and you guys can decide who wants to talk about it. Tell us, what is the Book of Belonging? Who is it for? And how can we get it?
So the Book of Belonging, when I've been pitching it to my friends, sometimes I joke and say it's a woo-woo progressive kids Bible, this time featuring women. But really, in all seriousness, it is a book centered around belonging. And that centering of belonging is in the story selection. It's in the representation and the pictures. It's reflecting the natural belonging and inclusivity that's already there in that original text, but we don't see reflected in the selection of stories that come in a lot of our kids' Bibles. And it's centered on these pillars. I think it's the book that a lot of parents who are maybe wounded and hurting and have felt a little lost and left behind by their faith need as they're thinking about possibly coming back and sharing these stories with their kids. And this is the story that we absolutely want to give to the kiddos in our lives, that they don't have to deconstruct later. A story that is just championing in every story that they belong, that others belong, that you are belonging, that you're beloved, and that you are delightful. And we're trying to do that with every story and with every picture, and to give these kids tools alongside these stories to ask questions and process and move that storytelling out of the head and into their bodies and their hearts. And it's just such a special project, and I can't overstate how wonderful Marri's writing it is and how much incredible research and thoughtfulness and prayer went into this book. And yeah, and I drew the pictures.
I love
you said
it.
that so offhand as though that isn't so integral to the message of belonging, that Rachel was so intentional. One thing Rachel has said before is like it acts as this love letter to kids who maybe haven't seen themselves in a story Bible before, that Rachel was so intentional with her illustrations. Like there's bodies of all kinds, like all shapes, all sizes, all colors, all abilities, all ages. There's pregnant bodies. You almost never see that in a story Bible. There's breastfeeding bodies. You literally never see that in a story Bible. And if it's almost like if we're going to talk the talk, we also need to not walk the walk, I guess, draw the draw or draw the whatever it is, that if we're telling kids that they belong, then we need to back that up with what we're showing in the pictures too. And I think Rachel has just knocked that out of the park with the illustrations too. So you're like, and I drew the pictures, as though that's not.
And I drew the pictures. So I was remembering that some of your other questions were like, who is this for? And I love our tagline is stories for kind and contemplative kids. And I'd say in parentheses is, and they're grown-ups. And I think that speaks to some of your experience that you're talking about, Stephanie, where you're sort of healing with your baby Stephanie right now, your inner child right now, that you needed to hear these stories again and see these stories again.
Yeah.
And it's a strange sort of remembering. You maybe have never heard those stories read to you or illustrated for you in this way, but when you see them, there's just that deep soul recognition that this is right. This is what I always thought that this was really about.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to do.
I love that you say that, because I think that is why I've been so excited for this book for several reasons. One is because as a parent, it's really a daunting thing to go, okay, I need to explain potty training and like general nutrition and how to sleep and teeth brushing and God to you. And I just like, I didn't grow up in the church. And so I don't even have fallback language to use. I don't even, and I wouldn't necessarily want to use it anyway, because like you said, a lot of people, the way that they grew up in the church has made them, has caused a lot of distance between them and God now. And they're trying to reconcile that. So I feel like that's a place that I'm in as a parent, is I'm like, I don't even have the kid God vocabulary, because I missed that whole like section of my faith journey. So I don't even have that to fall back on. But then also, I don't want to give my kids messages that they need to then like undo. I want them to know that God really loves. Like I don't want to cause any damage. And I know that in the lives of so many people I love, some of the messages that they've gotten along the way have caused damage. And then for me, this happens to me in my faith. In all kinds of seasons where I'm like, this has gotten messy and this has gotten complicated. And why is everyone yelling? And that's totally where I've been for the last handful of years, is like, oh gosh, it feels hard to hear God above the noise of everybody yelling about who God is and what he says we're all supposed to be doing. And you can tune out the extra voices for a long time, but it takes so much work. And the voices are so loud that's been hard for me and for basically so many people that I know and love in the last handful of years. And so to have a book that and this is always how God works with me, is he's like, okay, I hear all of this. Let's just take it back to the beginning. Let's just go back to the beginning. And that's what I feel like this is. It's an invitation to let's just go back to the beginning. What does the simplest form of this look like without all of the stuff that we've put on top of it that kind of messes it up? So anyway, I'm super grateful for this. Marri, I know that the idea for this book came from a moment in a pool with your daughter, who I'm obsessed with, Ada. Can you tell us what happened?
Yes. So Ada and I were floating in the pool. I think it was 2020. So she would have been like maybe 6 then. And she just hits me with this question, Mom, does God love boys more than girls? And I'm like, what? Sit up off the raft. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? Where did that come from? And in my head, I'm like, I have raised you so much better than this. What happened? What went wrong? So it goes on to explain, well, the story Bible that we have at home, there's only 2 girl stories. The rest are boy stories. That's how she phrased it. And I did that thing that we so often do as parents where I'm like, yeah. Like we just assume our kids are being dramatic or something. But later that night, I went home and I flipped through this little story Bible we had. And sure enough, only 2 of this out of the, 30 or so stories had a female main character. And so I did what any normal person would do. And I ordered the top 8 story Bibles off of Amazon. And I went through them page by page. And I went through with a little sticky note and I kept a tally on how many of the stories had a female-centric, or how many of the stories were female-centric, how many of them mentioned a female, and how many of the pages had a female in the illustration. And the stats shouldn't have maybe, but did surprise me. Only out of these top 8 story Bibles on Amazon in 2021, there has been some good stuff that has come out since then. I feel like I need to put an asterisk on that. 7% of the stories on average had a female main character. 19% on average had a female mentioned in the story. And like when I say mentioned, not just like a named female character, I would take anything like wife, sister, daughter, she, like anything like that. I was giving a tally mark. And then 23% of the pages, the total pages, had a female depicted anywhere on the page. Like I was zooming in with my little magnifying glass on the crowds. Jesus got these crowds and it was just beards and beards and beards and beards. No women.
White men with beards. White men with beards.
Exactly. Blue eyes and beards. So I was outraged and frustrated. And, you're both moms, like nothing is more powerful or efficient than a mom full of rage. That fueled me probably more than anything has in my career. I wanted better for my daughters, and I had just had a baby boy, and I'm like, he's going to be born into this world where he thinks that he's like better than his sisters. We cannot have this. So as I was taking these tallies, I kept thinking in my head, like, okay, yeah, it would be really nice to have some of these stories feature women. It also would be really nice if these people had brown skin, like they did historically. It would be really great if there was a more contemplative angle. A lot of the story Bibles that you'll encounter have this sort of like morality angle of like, if you do this thing, if you obey your parents, then God is happy with you. Like it becomes transactional of like, they're sort of tied up with this bow of your behavior equals God's love. And that's not what I want for my kids. I don't want them to think that God loves them or that I love them because of what they do or they don't do. I want them to know that I love them and God loves them because of who they are, that there's nothing that they could do to make me love them more or less. Same with God. There's nothing you could do to make me love you more or less, or God love you more or less. Like it's who you are. You belong to us. And that's why we love you. And so I finally, at one point, I'm like, keeping track of all these things on my wish list. And at one point, it just became this moment of like, I threw up my hands. I'm like, okay, I guess I'll just do this myself. And so I started mulling over the idea of launching it on my own. I don't want to get too far ahead of us on the story, but we launched on Kickstarter. And it went really well. And then, one thing led to another. And it was actually a really sweet and affirming process that the more we talked about it, first it was just me and my little group of friends being like, would you want a book like this? Yeah. Would you want that? Yeah, I totally would. And then it was like, they're telling their friends, they're like, count me in. And then it takes off on the internet. And I think that at first I had thought like, this would be a cute thing to like give to my friends for Christmas. And then it just realizing, Anne Lamott says the most powerful sermon you can say is me too. And there's all these people all over the world showing up on the internet being like, no, me too. Like we all are feeling this vacuum in what's available. And we're all wanting to fill it with something good. And I think it was really interesting and beautiful timing too. Like we were coming off of the pandemic, and I think so many of us had gone from like going to church with our kids, putting them in Sunday school, to then we're at home and like, I'm the Sunday school teacher, I'm the preacher, I'm the worship leader. Like as parents, all of a sudden we're doing church from our living room and we're like, we are not equipped for this. Also, the tools that we have, there's this friction when we start using them where we're like, ugh. Like I used this at bedtime, but now that it's the only messaging my kids get, and now that I'm in charge of vetting it, there's something about it that doesn't feel exactly right. And I think I want parents to know, like, pay attention to that, first of all. Like, if you're reading your kid a book and something feels off where you want to go in there with a Sharpie and change the words, pay attention to that. Like, that is important. That's not nothing. So, sorry, I'm getting all riled up, but that's sort of the backstory. That's how we got started. And it's been just an absolute whirlwind ever since.
Marri, I want to ask you, this is no pressure on the way that you answer this.
Yeah.
But I know you thought about this so much. And so I want to have you have space to like talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
The doubt that pops up in, I think, a lot of our minds when you say, I don't see girl stories in, and Rachel, you kind of said something like, there's a tiny moment where you touched on this, but I want to like really shine a light on it. When we say like, I want to tell other stories, there's that part of us that goes, well, are we like inventing something here? Like, were women just not there? Like, and then we're like, oh my gosh, well, you can't like edit the Bible. You can't like pick and choose. You can't like, pull a soundbite that totally misconstrues the message. Talk to us about the work that you have done to, like, for the stories that you've selected, because I know that you have done like a dissertation's worth of work to make this like really rooted in history and in scripture and in, I don't know, all the places. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. Thank you for bringing that up, because this is sometimes a point of confusion and I always forget to address it. We did not make any stories up. That was not what we're about. When we say more female-centric stories, I didn't then go create characters and stories. And the ironic thing is that we are often accused of that. We have a sample story available on our website called The 5 Fearless Sisters, and it's a story taken directly from Numbers 29 in the Bible, the book of Numbers, chapter 29. In the Bible. And it's about these 5 sisters. It's this really beautiful story about how they were going to lose their inheritance due to like the ancient Mosaic laws. And they stand up and they, present their case to God. And because they didn't, well, I don't want to give the whole story away. Anyways, it's this really beautiful story about women asking for what they need. And I cannot tell you, I would say I could not count on, no, it would take more than 2 hands for me to count the amount of outraged emails I have gotten for people doing exactly what you said, Steph, like thinking that I am adding to the Bible, that I'm making up stories, to balance out what I see as an imbalance. No, it's there. It's already there. And the fact that you thought I made it up makes my point. That like I've had pastors say like, I have my PhD in biblical history and I didn't know about this story. I've had multiple pastors say like, I had no idea that these characters existed, but they're right there. And it's not, it's not a short story. Like some of the stories that I included, the story of Rhoda in the New Testament, she has 2 or 3 sentences worth of a story. And we expanded that a bit. We used our creative license. But the story of the daughters of Zelophehad in these 5 Fearless Sisters, it's 2 or 3 chapters worth. It's sprinkled throughout the Old Testament. Like it's not a small blip. And yet it's overlooked. So no, we did not make up stories. I think what's important to notice, like when something's rubbing you the wrong way, when I'm talking about like these parents listening to your intuition, if it rubs you the wrong way, is something to consider is anytime you're reading an interpretation of the Bible, you're reading an interpretation. Unless you speak ancient Hebrew, Greek, Akkadian, Aramaic, you're not reading the Bible as it was recorded. You're reading someone's interpretation of the Bible. And anytime you interpret, there's going to be paraphrasing and there's going to be a loss of meaning to some degree. Especially with story Bibles, you're not only reading someone's interpretation, but you're reading an author or a publishing house's selection of what is important. And it's someone else deciding what's important for your kids to read. And traditionally, the people deciding what stories are important for your kids to know, they have not deemed the story of the 5 fearless sisters important enough for your kid to know. And that's what I'm outraged about. And that's what Rachel's outraged about. That's what's rubbing parents the wrong way. It's not that, like, we're all aware that the Bible skews male. Like, Jesus was male and he's a pretty important character in the story. A lot of the stories are about Jesus. So yes, like when you look at the statistics, the Bible is talking more about men. It was written in a patriarchal society. The people recording the stories were the people in power, and the people in power were men, educated men. So yes, there's an imbalance there. So then when you take a selection from a larger library that is already largely male stories, yes, like people could argue that, yeah, of course, if it's going to be representative of the bigger text, then it's going to be naturally imbalanced. But I think that Rachel and I would argue that it is an act of resistance and an act of, correction and redemption to tell the stories that had previously gone untold. Like that's what, and I don't just do it with the Bible with my kids. You know, you go to a national monument and you see the stories or the statues or the people being honored. Like I always want to ask my kids, like, hey, whose story do you think is not being told here? Like who's being left out here? And it's almost always going to be women, and it's going to be people from marginalized communities that were left outside of belonging. And, you know, that's what we're doing here, like reading the Bible with a lens of belonging and telling stories with a lens of belonging. We're inviting those people back in, which is sort of like the whole point of Jesus's ministry. Like that's what Jesus was about. And so I think that Rachel and I are completely justified in the selection. And yes, to your point, Steph, we have not made up any stories where we're simply shining a light on the ones that have been left out. I'm probably going too long, but an example, the story of Zacchaeus is told in almost every story Bible. I would argue it doesn't have a ton of theological significance. I think that it's told because kids think it's silly. It's often told with language that is actually like pretty disrespectful to we don't know why Zacchaeus was shorter than other people in his community. Maybe he had dwarfism, maybe he was just naturally short, maybe he had disability, but either way, the language that's often used in these story Bibles is mocking him in the name of making it like fun and whimsical for kids. That's always rubbed me the wrong way. I wanted to pay attention to that. But Zacchaeus, I think it could be argued that his story doesn't further our understanding of Jesus's ministry or our understanding of what was going on. I think it's included because it's fun. So to leave out a story like the 5 fearless sisters who are actually making a point about belonging and about Mosaic law and about God's posture towards a marginalized group, to me, that doesn't add up. To keep certain stories in because they're fun, or just to make the point that the selection process has not always been perfect, intentional, or thoughtful. And that's something that we were hoping to correct.
Mic drop. I love it. I love it. So, of course, creating anything, no matter what it is, isn't easy. And Rachel, I am so excited to hear from you. Marri, I want to ask you one more question on this. I know that, like, aside from the logistical challenges of getting a book out into the world, I know that because we're each other's people, I know that you had some really loud messages in your head that you actually shouldn't be doing this work. What were those messages and where did they come from?
Some of this is like very me specific, but I was raised in a tradition, in a denomination, and in a family that told me I had no place of authority spiritually or or in my family or in any future family I might have. I was expected to stay at home, not work outside the home, have babies and raise them to be good Christian babies. But that was about the extent of what was expected of me. And so to do this work, I had to hire a babysitter. I had to be, and I was already working full time, but to do it for this type of work had a special significance, I think. And then to go, as we've been promoting it, or as I've been talking about it, to go into places where I would speak with authority on the Bible, or I would speak with authority on a spiritual matter. I had some pretty loud inner critics. I think some from my family of origin, some from my denomination of origin, that, I'd be up on stage and I'd hear this voice in my head, like, you have no business being up here. We got trolled pretty hard in the Kickstarter. And actually, Steph, one of your former followers, was in my comments saying how excited she was about the book. She's in seminary now. She's so excited when she graduates. This is actually a really sweet full circle story. You can cut it out if you want, but she was so excited to graduate from seminary and to use the Book of Belonging with her future congregants or whatever, whenever she graduated. And the trolls that were in my comments from some of the denomination that I came from were telling her, you shouldn't be in seminary. You should drop out, go home, find a husband. People were being really mean to her, saying like, that's hilarious that you think you could do that. Go back home, get in the kitchen where you belong. Stuff like that, like pretty archaic messaging popping up. And, I'm deleting them as fast as I can. My finger on the delete button was like, da, 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 da. But what's really sweet is that I just heard from this same friend. I don't know that I should say her name out loud. I just was in contact with her because she was promoting. She got her copy in the mail 3 years later after all of that happened. She shared with me that she graduated from seminary and now she works at a college. She teaches a Bible class and she leads small groups with students who are learning about who God is, maybe for the first time. And she's going to use the Book of Belonging in these discussions with her students because she feels like they tell the story in a simple enough way, but also open up the discussion for people maybe having that discussion for the first time. So for me, that was like such a redemptive thing to hear, that it sort of came full circle, that like not only did she not listen to the voices in her head or in my comment section, I didn't either. And now we're both in this full circle moment where I'm out here promoting this book that's taken on a life of its own. And she's out there, preaching and teaching just as God made her to. And it's just really sweet to see that come full circle.
I love that. I mean, I hate that. And then I love that. Marri, did you feel like you had these voices in your head, but like when this idea came about and you're like, okay, well, maybe I think I'll do this. Did you feel like, and I am equipped and I am exactly the woman for the job. And I am like,
no.
Because I think that people would assume that, like, oh, well, of course, like, yeah, you did this. And so of course you thought you could.
No, not at all. I think there's something to the fact, to the fact that I was doing it for my kids. I think so many of us will shy away from something if it's just for ourselves, but we'll face it head on with all of our strength and integrity if it's on behalf of someone that we love dearly. And that's what happened is, I think that if I, and Steph, this, I have another book I tried to get published years and years ago. And I was really hesitant with it. I didn't have a lot of faith in it. When I would talk about it, I would get super weird. And the Book of Belonging, it's like, it's for my kids. I would do anything for my kids. And I think it's really sweet and representative too of like, Rachel has said this before, that she's like, I think that God is at least as, I know that God is as least as compassionate as I am, that God is as least as concerned with his kids as I am, that God is at least as forgiving as I am to my kids. So to think about the fire that built in me on behalf of my kids and compare that to God's posture towards me is a really, really healing moment for me. The other day, we brought a a church in my state had ordered 100 copies of the Book of Belonging. So my family and I drove up to this church to deliver the books in person, and they asked me to go up on stage and talk about it. And it was the first moment I had ever spoken. This church didn't have a pulpit because they're very cool. They have what they call a sacred rug, to just stand on a sacred rug and speak with authority about Scripture and God's names for us and who God says we are and who we get to claim as children of God, with my 3 kids sitting in the audience, was such a special, significant moment for me. And I think the only reason that I had the courage and the drive to do that, or any of the work leading up to it, was because I truly believe that God's posture towards me is that same insistent drive for me, the same way that I want my kids to know that they belong and that they're good and that their belonging is secure no matter what they do, and that they're loved no matter what they do, and that they're delightful to God no matter how they act. That drive is only my human expression of that I can only get from a divine source. And so if I feel that way about my kids, how much more does God feel that way about me and every other woman and person on the planet? And I think that is like, I don't want that to be like a glib answer to someone who's like, how do you move forward in this dream that you feel God has put on your heart? And me to be like, just believe that God loves you. But to think about someone you love dearly and sit in the position of looking at that person trying to live out the thing that that they are fully equipped for, and your posture towards them, magnify that on a God level. And I think that's the start of where the direction we head in, if that makes sense.
I love that. I love that. Rachel, I want to have, tell us like the backstory of how things come about, both in like a heart and mind kind of way, but also in like a logistical way. You guys like decided, I know that you went back and forth of like, do we try to get a publishing deal with this book, or do we try to do it on our own? What does that look like? And I know that everyone who's trying to make something or do something is thinking like, okay, well, do I try it this way or do I try it this way? And also like, who says I'm allowed to do this? And if I like, do I need someone else's permission? You guys went forward without permission or blessing from an established publisher. Can you tell us a little bit about like when you did the Kickstarter, what was the goal again and what happened?
Mari's going to have to help me with numbers because those always fall out of my head. But we started with a modest goal of just getting this thing printed. And Mari wanted it made for her kids. I think you said that as like, listen, if I just end up making this for my kids and my friends' kids, excellent. Like, job done.
Yeah.
But I think through hearing some more Me Too's from the community, Mari leaned in some faithfulness to this idea and thought, we're going to get Craig to come and videotape us talking about it. And she's going to put some of her money down, not Kickstarter money, to go chase down this illustrator and pay her a living wage to do some sample artwork for the book, just to see if it's even viable. So that's where we were with the Kickstarter. Was we think this could be cool. It'd be really great if we could actually make it and actually pay ourselves to make it and have it exist in the world. That was the goal.
Yeah.
And then it sort of grew from there. We got invited to a conference and we spoke at the conference. And from the stage at that conference, and Mari, I'm so proud of you just talking about being on stage and on sacred rugs and things, because we joke Mari has talking about moving towards the things that we're afraid of. Traditionally, doesn't love public speaking.
Rachel, you can say I hate it. Rachel is always like, I am like sick to my stomach trying not to poop my pants before we go on stage. And Rachel is the one like rubbing my back, being like, you have to breathe.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we get up there, and then from that time of us both sitting on stools and talking to the people at this conference, we practically get yanked off stage by our friend Jonathan, who was going to become our agent. And he was like, have you considered traditional publishing? And we're like, well, yes, but you know,
I don't know.
we did not. We were worried about a traditional publisher stomping on our dreams and telling us you can't do this, or this is too much of this or too much of that. And I think a little bit of insecurity on our parts too. And we just thought, oh, we can protect this and keep it just how we want it if we keep it small and do this Kickstarter thing. But Jonathan had there's the decisions you make because you're believing in yourself and no one has spoken blessing over it. But actually, then there are moments when people speak over you and do speak and grant you permission and say like, no, please share this with the rest of the world. Let me help you. I'm uniquely qualified to help you do this. And Marri and I are not excellent admin babies, marketers, those sorts of things. They're things that we find deeply distasteful and stressful. So it was really great to have a Jonathan in our lives. And he coached us through how to make a book pitch. And I remember there was just weeks and weeks of Marri and I designing this giant deck. She's doing like lots of writing and we got pictures in it and I'm doing all this layout. We're just prepping this deck for weeks and weeks and getting it fine-tuned. And then Jonathan bringing it to publishers. And it was really affirming to have, what was it, like 9, Marri?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
9 publishers want to have meetings with us. And you mentioned that first question you asked, like, who is this book for? That was sort of a North Star for us throughout this process because it can be, I know it's hard for us in different ways to not feel tugged by what different publishers were hoping to milk out of this book, this little cash cow, you know, they were like, whoa, this is lovely. And that's not to downplay what I think was sincere belief and support in a book, but I think that genuinely some of these publishers were excited to share it with the world. And we had to work on setting our own boundaries and discussing like our expectations and what we were hoping to do with the book. And some of that, there was a lot of discussion, like, is this going to be a bridge builder book or is this going to be like a category breaker? And a lot of publishers not wanting to get too quote unquote progressive with the message or to like not alienate a chunk of their audience, like being very careful about that. And I remember Marri and I would sometimes have to get off calls and like be like, remember who this book is for. Mm-hmm. Even like this audience that they're afraid of alienating, they already have like 20 story Bibles. They have resources. They are well resourced. And I think that was a tricky thing for us in the process too, is I think both being clinical people pleasers was figuring out how to, as Marri said, who is this for? And it's easier to lean in the direction of things that feel frightening or to, I think I've taken this as a North Star for myself sometimes too. It's like, if it's frightening me, yes, be safe and pay attention to that feeling. But if it's frightening me, it could be a good indicator that is something really important and really needed. If it feels like there's risk involved, there is risk involved. And it's risky, but there's also like that high risk, high reward thing. So we talked about that. And like, what about the kids who aren't seeing themselves in this book? So that was fun. We went through that whole process and then ended up finally feeling a really good fit with our publisher Convergent with Penguin. And that was just delightful. So that's a little bit, was that your question? What was some of the story and background of how it came to be? I've already forgotten.
Yeah. Well, and you guys, Mar, do you remember, like, I mean, Kickstarter numbers are always really cool for me because I'm like,
numbers.
It just shows like, we thought maybe this many people would be interested. And actually it turns out, do you remember? I mean, I'm sure you do. What are they?
It's burned in my mind. It was tricky setting the budget for our Kickstarter because everyone advising us was saying, if you're going to promise something to people, like have some integrity and deliver it. Like if you're going to promise them a book, because for Kickstarter, people give you money and then they're just giving the money. You're not obligated to fulfill that. And I think Rachel and I are both the type of people that we didn't. Oh, you didn't? Surprise.
No.
All that work we did, we didn't have to.
Oh my God. Well, that's good to know when you're...
But people were advising us like, make it so that you can deliver on that. You know what I mean? Don't set yourself up with some scarcity. So we set a budget to pay, like Rachel said, to pay ourselves a living wage. We all have kids. We need childcare. So we had set a budget and we had to have a minimum print run to make it worthwhile to actually print the book. So we set the budget for $73,000, which felt enormous. And we were both terrified because we knew the amount of books we would have to sell in order to reach that number. And we were like, just living on a prayer at one point. Because if you don't reach the goal with Kickstarter, you give all the money back. You don't say we raised 69,000, we'd give all that back. Unless you meet the goal, you can't keep it. So we just kind of sent it out in the world and just hoped and prayed because we both knew our friends were into it and our sort of like small fringe community, but and it just took off. It was one of the most affirming things I've ever witnessed, just watching the numbers tick, 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 tick up. And it was just this massive Me Too from people around us. I guess it didn't go viral. That's a totally separate thing. But we met our goal within 10 days. We surpassed it. By the end of the month-long Kickstarter, we had raised $94,000. So, $20,000 more than our original goal, which was just, yes, the money. Great. We were able to pay for childcare, but also just
you're able to actually do the work.
We're actually able to do the work. And in order to reach that goal, over 1,500 people had to sign on board, had to pledge for a book. And so to know that there was at least 1,500 people out there that wanted what we wanted, that were supportive enough to trust us with their money, I think was just a massive affirmation and just energy builder, I think, for both of us. We're okay, this is actually a thing. People actually want this. It's not just us and our weird friends. It's this is a thing. People are looking for it. So that was incredible. Yeah. So those were the numbers there.
It's so awesome. It's so awesome. I distinctly remember being Stephanie, don't buy 30 books. You cannot buy 30 books. You cannot afford 30 books. That is not what you're supposed to do. But it was how do I vote for this 1,000 million bazillion times? And it's funny because literally as we got on the call, I was Marri, I'm going to need some more copies. Because they're so beautiful. I don't want my kids to touch them. So I'm going to need some backup copies so that I can have heirloom copies for them, for their future children and families and all the things. Anyway, so Rachel, so Marri is doing, trying to kind of walk down the road with this book, isn't equipped or interested in trying to do the illustrations. Marri, you actually are a great artist, but
no, I did try. And my husband, who's a designer, was absolutely not. He's usually very kind, but he was don't do this.
Don't do this. So Rachel, when you came into this project, where were you in your life, and specifically in your faith and your relationship with the church? Was this project a natural fit? Well, yes, of course. Or was this a little bit of was the idea of working on a kid's Bible a little bit of a stretch for you?
A little column A, a little column B. So I had gone through, Marri, what year did you approach me?
2021.
2021. Okay, so we've all been, most of us collectively have been sad sacks for a year-ish or more.
Yes.
And pre-pandemic sad sackiness, I had been going through a couple years push with my church, doing the classic, going through deconstruction, big questions, getting a lot of green lights from people in leadership. My husband and I were leaders at our church. We're just going, learning more, discovering more. This message just seems to be getting, it's even bigger and better in the news than we thought it would be. But there was some policy that dropped down at our church around queer inclusion. And we were wait, what? So throughout that process, also some of our friends during Black Lives Matter happening were feeling pretty tokenized in the spaces too. I was increasingly having a really difficult time attending services and being able to be present, specifically in the worship context. I was just getting more and more anxious and stressed and just could not it's so funny that I ended up working on a project about belonging because I kept thinking, like, who isn't in this space? Who can't feel safe in this space? Like, I feel safe. And after a couple, specifically after that policy dropped, like months pushing and trying to figure out how we can help change the policy. I'm like, there are Bible studies, there are churches who have modeled this for us. Like, there's a 3-year journey we can go on as a church to like get here. Trying to do the classic, like, change things from the inside. It didn't work out. And I finally like got a proper meeting with leadership and got a like, thank you, but no thank you. And that had sort of been our like, okay, if we get this closed door, like we have to leave. So we left, and then the pandemic hit. So it was just great timing to process through some grief and do some more deconstructing and sitting with my feelings and drawing about like this whole process that like a place that had felt safe and great for me. And then beginning to realize like, you know, do you know what, what went into making the sausage, you know? And for a while, I didn't, by the time Marri reached me, I was a place where I was no longer even calling myself a Christian and was doing some healing around that. And actually it was kind of coming back around the mountain where I was for maybe a long time, I really couldn't read scripture or really touch it. It was way too triggering for me. And just when Marri was coming around the mountain to talk to me, I was starting to have an appetite for it again, saying, man, I'd really love to try again. Like, I think I'm feeling safe. I've gone to therapy. I've been in these lovely small groups. Like, I think I'd like to re-engage with this and in a new way. And then I got the email from Marri. So it was, yes, was it like, wow, this is a little out of left field? Yes, but it also felt just deeply like exactly resonant in the absolute perfect divine timing, if you'd like to say. And I think throughout this whole process, to use some, like, I don't know if it's evangelical language, but I felt very led throughout this whole process. And this deep conviction that we were on the right track, even if it was frightening, even if there's lots of, I don't know what I believe, or am I the right person to be doing this? So, that's where I was when the project started. And then so much has happened since. And it's been really beautiful to feel like the act of making this piece of work and engaging with these stories was transformational in the way that I think people have always found these stories to be transformational. So it's beautiful to like really get in there.
I want to hear more about that, but I want to pause for a second because I know that for some people, the word deconstruction itself is like totally triggering. And I think probably because my husband is he's a really big word person for the fact that I'm the writer in our family. And he always says like, it's really hard to agree on something when we have different definitions. It's really hard to talk about something when we're talking about two different things, but maybe using the same words. So can you guys like speak to that for a second? Like what, if someone's like, I've heard the word deconstruction and it sounds like it's like the opposite of everything good and holy and worthy in the world. Like, what is it? What is it? And is it something we need to be afraid of?
I would say, as a person who has deconstructed and is working on reconstructing, I think for many of us who've fallen into that camp of deconstructing, my words stumble. We're not destroying something. We are taking something apart and examining the pieces and figuring out what parts of our beliefs are inherited, where they came from, how did that sausage get made? And what I would love to say for those of you who might be a little frightened by that word, to please know that those of us who have or are going through that process, it was most likely an act of deep faithfulness to the message of Jesus Christ and to the work of God and the Holy Spirit in them. They felt led. It was, for me, that process of deconstruction was being so filled with the love of God that I wanted to learn more and more. And I then began to learn about Hebrew and hermeneutics and how the Bible was assembled. I began to learn about the history of the church and the people that the church as a capital R religious body has hurt as an institution, apart from the message of Jesus Christ and these holy scriptures, completely apart from that story. And that's people deconstructing. They're not often deconstructing maybe some of the things that you love about your faith. they're just trying to sort through what has been broken, warped, and damaging about it. And I think that there are people who are trying to live an examined life and trying to be faithful to that. And that does result in some trauma sometimes, and people saying, I need to take a break and this hurts and I feel it's really frightening. And do I need to throw the baby out with the bathwater? And you know what? People are going to make different choices for different reasons. And I think that all of that's okay. People heal in their own time. And maybe a person who might be afraid of that word deconstruction might not be happy where someone who's deconstructed and reconstructed, you might not think they've landed where you think they should have. But I would just ask that you have generosity for how much sincere introspection, I'm certain prayer, faithfulness and work that person put into deconstructing. I think a person who's deconstructing isn't someone who's trying to be spiritually or intellectually lazy, and especially not someone who's trying to be manipulative, coercive, or to do something destructive.
I love that.
That's my soapbox.
Love it. Rachel speaks so beautifully about this. And for anyone who's interested, she has this really cool, graphical explanation that she's done with pictures accompanying it on her Instagram about this place called Nushin. I guess you'd have to hunt it down. It's a little older on her Instagram, but it's well said and well illustrated. I just wanted to add two things that I think has been helpful when I've had these conversations with people. First of all, everyone I know who has gone through a deconstruction process has done it with a fair amount of grief. I think it is really synonymous with a grief process. And anyone who has grieved something or someone that they love knows that there's stages of grief and that you can cycle through them and that you don't go in order. And that so say someone loses their spouse and that person is really, really, really angry. You try to talk to them about marriage and they snap at you. You're not going to say oh my gosh, why are they being so sensitive? Why are they hating on marriage? You would just say of course, they're grieving. And I think that some of the people who have a problem with those in a deconstruction phase will say, well, look at them. They're so angry. Because, we're on social media now. Everything you're processing publicly for the most part. And there are people who are processing their deconstruction with a lot of anger. And I think that that is incredibly healthy. And I think it's important. I think it's really important. Anger is a way that we move grief through our body. It's super important. And those who might be listening who are in an anger stage of their deconstruction process, pay attention to that anger, because anger tells us what we're passionate about. What you're super angry about is probably the thing that means the most to you about your relationship with the divine. If you're super pissed about it, it's probably been threatened or corrupted or warped in some way that you need to dig into and understand in order to move forward in your spiritual progression. And the other thing I wanted to say is, in that grief process, if someone was grieving their spouse, you wouldn't go right up to them and say hey, are you on the dating apps? Are you back out there? You trying to find your person? That would be so inconsiderate and horrible of you. In the same way, people grieve in different ways and also in different time limits. That some people, they leave the church they were attending, or they start to deconstruct, or they start to dig into things, and it's a 10-year process. There's some people who it's a 10-day process. There's some people who maybe never outwardly end up where you think they should, back in sort of back, but it's a process and you can't rush it. People have to grieve and deconstruct and examine their life on their own time, and asking them to get to a place where you think that they should be is not only inconsiderate, but just not helpful. It's just not helpful. What do we all need when we're grieving something or someone? We just want someone to sit with us in it, right? In the Hebrew tradition, you sit on the floor for 7 days in silence and people visit you and they feed you. That's what we should be doing for people who are in their deconstruction zone. Is we need to be sitting with them and feeding them. The last thing that they need is someone coming at them, rushing them, or shaming them for their very natural and healthy anger at something that is sad. Last thing I want to say, I think that deconstruction is a very natural stage of faith. There's this book, for those of you who like to nerd out on it, it's called The Critical Journey by Janet Hagberg. she has this book about the different stages of faith that naturally happen in any religion, or any monotheistic religion, and any faith journey across the course of a life. And one of the stages she has, there's something called the wall where you bounce off of it. Most people bounce off of it or break through it. It's hard to explain without doing like a full Reading Rainbow breakdown of the book, but she paints it as this natural process of anyone who has faith in anything. If you don't question it, you don't grow. If you don't take it apart, you can't make it bigger to fit you. And I think of it almost like a hermit crab. Like, you know how hermit crabs, every once in a while, like they start to outgrow their shell and they have to wander until they find a bigger one to fit in because they have outgrown it. They couldn't stay in that shell. It would be painful and destructive to them. So they have to wander. But if you saw a hermit crab wandering around with no shell on, you wouldn't be like, oh, look at them. That's so terrible. They left their shell. You'd be like, hope you find one that fits you, right? Like that's a natural progression for any of us who are growing in any way, whether it's physically or spiritually. Like when you outgrow, like we should outgrow our childhood definitions of God, right? Like we should outgrow our angsty teenage like worship music obsessions. Like we should be growing. That's healthy and normal. And I would argue like that's what Jesus was doing with the Jewish faith. He's saying like, you've heard it said this way, I say to you a new thing. Like it's the people of God outgrowing the box that they had God in. And that's only been ever a wonderful thing for our relationship with the divine, to have someone crack us out of what we were trapped in.
That's so good. That's so good. Okay, Rachel, I want to talk about all this forever, but I'm keeping us on track. Rachel, you mentioned that some things have changed in your heart, and that encountering these stories and spending so much time with them obviously had an impact on you. And I would love to hear what that's looked like.
Yeah, I'd love to share more with you. So I think it was starting when we were working on the book. I was saying, you know what? I think that even though I don't know if calling myself a Christian is the most honest thing I could say right now about my beliefs, I really wanted to re-engage with these stories again. And I think the best way I could describe it for myself now is it's like my Christian faith was like my mother tongue. It's the first language that I learned. It's a language that I learned to sing in, to love. It was one of my first places where I felt belonging and community and a drive to be a more generous and loving human on this planet. And then there came a point when in that mother tongue, I experienced some pain, some grief, some abuse. And I had to stop. I had to move away. I had to go on a European tour. I had to go experience different cultures and languages and get the heck out of Dodge. Right. And for some people, especially if we're using kind of like the abuse metaphor, it might not ever be okay to go back. Like you just can't. It's okay to have that. And you can experience love and spiritual wholeness elsewhere. And I think that's perfectly acceptable and great. For me, I realized it was like I was walking down the street and I started like talking to myself in my mother tongue again, or I started humming that old familiar song. And I went, oh, you know what? I'm kind of interested in like maybe picking up those stories again and seeing what comes up, but on new terms. And that's absolutely what happened with this, working with these stories with Marri. It was so beautiful to experiencing them in a fresh way, like hearing Mari's interpretations and storytelling, getting to participate with her in the forming of that. Like it's often very traditional for the manuscript to arrive completed to the illustrator. I was invited by Marri at the beginning of the process to be considering these stories together. I was invited into that process, and coming from traditions before, it was like, you don't have authority to be part of this storytelling process. It's like, actually, totally do. And so do you. Like we all belong to these stories, and they can belong to all of us. And there shouldn't be so much pressure, I think, to like have the one correct interpretation. We mentioned this rabbinical tradition of turning the gem. And I hope like that this text, that we're just one more iteration of storytelling and learning from these stories. There will be more, and I hope there will be. And it was really beautiful to get kicked in the guts by some of these stories because of the way that Marri wrote them, but then also then being invited to imagine myself in the places of these characters. It was one of the first times that instead of receiving these stories from a pulpit or a Bible study or Adventures in Odyssey, I was looking at the text and I was reading with Marri, and then I was trying to think, but what did it feel like to be that person? And like, that's an Ignatian spiritual practice. It's an ancient practice. It's called sacred imagination. And I got to do that over and over again without the pressure of being like, oh, am I interpreting this correctly? You know, these are old stories that have been told over and over again by word of mouth. Some have floated to the surface in popularity. Others have fallen off. There's stories that didn't make it into the final text that I'm sure were deeply impactful to the people of God. We don't even have them. They might be stuck in some scroll somewhere. They maybe never even got written down. And I think that that's really beautiful that we get to continue to be part of that storytelling process. And it was really healing for me to get to do that and then get totally gobsmacked by stories that had, I don't know, I'd kind of grown callous to. I reference this a lot, but like I became a mother throughout this process. And the story of the death, the birth and the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ can get a little like product-y. You know, it's like, this is the Roman road. This is where this story is supposed to take you. This is the message you're supposed to get. Paul said so. And it can get a little two-dimensional, and particularly the person of Mary. And I interacted with those stories in a new way. And suddenly I was a mother and I was like, oh my gosh, what might this experience have been like for her? Marri does a great job of pulling that out in writing. But then I just as an example, the crucifixion story, there were some stories that I did some brainstorming on beforehand. I did some sketching. Marri was doing some writing, and I did not touch that one. I was like, this is a loaded, very loaded story. And I'm going to wait until I have Mari's final copy to really do any work on it. And then I'm setting aside like a solid week to just sit with it respectfully. Like, I'm not going to try to put my own spin on this just yet. And what rocked me about encountering the crucifixion story and then the resurrection story was I was seeing it through Mary's eyes, which I was not expecting. I was imagining as a mother of a new baby boy, like what it would have been like to see, to give up your baby boy to this fame, to this huge story, to see him, this person that you held and that you nursed, like swept up in the crowds, and everyone pinning their hopes on him in different ways. He's going to save us. He's going to overthrow Rome. He's going to, change everything. That's your baby boy out on that donkey, as the palm fronds are waving. And then to be there at the foot of the cross, like don't know if we can cuss on this, but man, like that hit me in the gut. And it made the resurrection so much more special because I just had this image of, I don't think it's ever really referenced super explicitly in the text, but what would have been like for Mary to hold her baby boy again? Like we had these like beautiful moments of seeing like the disciples be like, yeah, he's back. It was like, great, good for you. I know he meant a lot to you, but how do you think that felt for his mom? Okay. Like, how did that feel for his family and his siblings? And so I just had this image of like them kind of crumpled on the floor and he's on his knees and she's kind of squishing his face to hers. And she's just saying, my baby boy. And the family's all gathered around. Oh, and it was a choice I made towards the end. And a couple parts of the text, I liked referencing like these relationships between mothers and their children and mothers and their sons. I do it with Moses and then I do it with Mary. And you'll see like in Mary's first story when we're just like seeing her and receiving that good news and being startled by the angel, she's wearing a bracelet. And then when I show the adult Jesus in his ministry, he's wearing that same bracelet. And so I just had this like moment of sacred imagination, like what would that have been like for them as a family and for her as a mother? And that also then impacts you as a parent reading these stories to your kid, right? So all that to say, there were lots of stories. The prodigal son story hit me hard in a way that it hadn't before. Lots of them did, but it was just such a beautiful, I think, as I just said, I like went on a retreat, like a pilgrimage, learning about like sacred practices and with secular texts. I do believe like a text that is sacred or generative, it's something that you can read lovingly and keep getting more and more and more from. And it urges you to be a more loving person. And it was really wonderful to be regifted that from the text. Something that for a while felt really toxic and damaging. It was nourishing me again. I was like, wow, just super humbling. Like these stories still are worth telling and retelling. And I think there was maybe a point during the angry part of my deconstruction, which I agree with Marri, super healthy, especially as a woman, especially as someone from a Christian background, and not so much the fire and brimstone version, for me to actually engage with my anger. There were times I was like, you know what? Like, if every single Bible in the world disappeared, that might be better for everybody. Like, we might all need a break from this. Like, God will still exist. And maybe we'll have to do something else for a while, you know? And to go from there to this, like, just renewed tenderness with this text and these stories has just been a real gift. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you, Rachel. The other thing I want to ask you about is, and you know, the thing that I really want people to take away from your story and your journey is that no matter who they are or no matter what they're trying to do in the world, like, they're going to come upon obstacles. It's not an if, it's a when. And I think that if we know this, that everybody encounters doubts and fears and struggles and obstacles on any road they're walking down, I think it helps us to not feel like we've done something wrong and like that we should quit when we hit those obstacles in our own path. And so, Rachel, I know that you've mentioned a little bit about this, but you went through a massive life change during this project. You became a mom. And I know that with that massive life change came a lot of hardship, which I also know made working on this probably really difficult. Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. Within this project, I had some injuries. I had a miscarriage. I got pregnant again. I was like with Marri on a retreat when I remember starting the retreat and being like, Marri, my period is due on this retreat. And she knew about the miscarriage like the month or so before. I said, so let's just buckle up and possibly prepare for some hard feelings on this retreat together. And it was really lovely to like be on one day, and then like those of you who are familiar with pregnant bodies and menstruating bodies, that when you get pregnant, sometimes you can have something called implantation bleeding. So I remember like walking down the stairs or coming out of the bathroom. Was like, period. And Mari's like, oh, and you know, she was just like loving and so sweet with me. But then I remember like by the end of the day, I was like, but I have not seen more. And she's like, Rachel, that you might be pregnant. And I think after the tenderness of having a miscarriage very, very early on in pregnancy, but I think a lot of us, there's like, you try to protect yourself. Or like, I don't want to get my hopes up. And especially after losing, I didn't want to get my hopes up again, but I felt safe with Marri to get my hopes up with her and to know that she would hold me in that was really beautiful. And yeah, I got pregnant, and I went into that pregnancy I'd had costochondritis, and then I got pregnant, and I had a really, really tough first trimester. I had just debilitating morning sickness. I took meds for it. I was never actually puking. I was just horizontal, like a lot, and then sleeping a lot because of the meds, and all of that being sedentary and stuff then exacerbated the injury. I had like a few perfect weeks in my second trimester before then like all these rib problems came up. And then as your body starts producing new hormones and starts changing shape and stuff, my whole body got out of whack. I started having really bad headaches, and after having vision changes and this horrible, painful burping thing that would happen when I had the headaches. And I couldn't eat normally. I couldn't sleep normally, and just sucked. And we didn't know what was going on. I got an endoscopy. We did all these tests, and finally, when I started seeing a PT and like got dry needling on my neck and shoulders, we figured out this is all related to like relaxin, this hormone that's just making me really loosey-goosey, and then not getting a lot of sleep. And turns out you use your neck a lot when you breastfeed and draw for a living. So all that made it really tough. And I think for any of those in your audience who are Enneagram friends, I'm a 7. And so I'm a more introverted 7, but I am a 7. And I do delight in some fun, and I would like to get the heck away from some pain. And I think a lot of us know that like a path of transformation for the enthusiast is to sit with our pain, sit with our grief, sit with our fear. And yeah, I had to do a lot of that, and it was not pleasant. And I think like over and over again, dealing with the anxiety and the frustration of and not realizing also that I was struggling with postpartum depression. I just thought I had baby brain. And right before we kicked off on the project, I'd gotten like my ADHD diagnosis. So it was just like a mess, right? And those days felt so long and so painful. What was beautiful was that I like loved being a mom and loved being close to Finn, but the heartbreak of like not being able to hold my kid normally, because it was like a little 8-pound baby. Like I couldn't hold him because of setting things off with my neck. I'd have to do special stuff. And then feeling the pressure, like all the pressure of this beautiful story that we're wanting to tell, and feeling I'm disappointing team, I'm disappointing Penguin, I'm disappointing Marri. Like all of that was happening, and it was messy. And there were good days, and there were a lot of bad days. What's really sweet about this story is like I finished breastfeeding, and I was like, I said I'd see a psychiatrist when I got done breastfeeding around the 1-year mark with Finn, Finn for ADHD. And I saw the psychiatrist, and she was like, baby girl, you are depressed. And I was like, what, me? No, I'm tired. And that was like really helpful and a wake up call. And I think maybe some people and some recovering optimists in the crowd might identify with this. It's really scary to feel like you're not okay.
Yeah.
And to hear like officially that you are not okay. But it was also beautiful. I reached out to Marri, I reached out to Jonathan. I said, here's what's going on. I think I need an extension. I think I need more time. And they were so great. And the publishing team was so great. They're like, your mental health, your physical health, it matters. We care about you. Take the time you need. And I'm laughing because like, I don't know, like 3 to 5 days later, our agent Jonathan called, was like, listen, do not change your plans. Do not feel pressure. I'm just here to present new information that has arisen. The Suez Canal and the Panama Canal are both experiencing difficulties, which will cause major delays that we can't predict for the book. So us pushing back your deadline by a week or two won't push back our pub date by a week or two. It will push it back by a quarter. Like now the book will just come out in January or later. And I was like, no, Marri and I have worked too hard for people not to buy this for Christmas. Okay. Like this, Marri deserves a minivan. Okay.
Mama wanted that minivan.
I know it's very motivating. So I laughed and I was like, if you please give me a day, I want to make this work. There's a big gut no to that option. And so Marri got with me, and she was an ADHD language. She was my executive functioning. Like she took care of any decision making. We looked at every single spread, and I just vomited at her. Here's what needs to happen on this spread, like all of like the edits. And then she had me come and assign amounts of time that I thought that would take. And then she did the math, she did the organization, and was like, well, great news. You don't have enough time to do that. And then she went through and she hacked. She helped make this decision. She's like, you know what? You wanted 2 weeks for this one. You get 3 days. Like that's what's happening now. And then each morning she helped me make a plan. And each morning she would text me and be like, okay, do you want a hard task or an easy task today? And she would give them to me. And she had like color coded them. And when I finished a task, she'd be like, you get 2 Pomodoros, Rachel, which is like a time management technique. Like you get 2 25-minute things to work on this one. And she kept me on task, and it was a blast. Like thing at the very end of the project, which I expected to be the most miserable, ended up being the most fun and just destroyed. I'd also started Wellbutrin, so thank you, medication. But like I suddenly felt like this beautiful release, like this positive pressure and support to just like stop futzing around. Don't agonize about it because you don't have time.
Yeah.
You just got to draw it. I think that's going to always be a forever tender thing for me about this book, that there was so much pain alongside it. And that pain and that grief is in the illustrations. I think it put me into such a reverent posture with some of these characters who were experiencing pain and insecurity and indecision, in a way that as an Enneagram 7, sometimes you can kind of like glide over that stuff. I really had to feel it with those characters, and it made it into the pictures.
It's so weird. Like my reaction, like I wanted to say like, thank you for your pain, or like, thank you for sharing it with us. Thank you for feeling it so that you could put pictures to what we feel. Like, I think that it's important to feel our feelings. It's important to like do the work to go through hard things. And it's important for ourselves, but it's also really important for the people around us, because you can't, like, some of the most beautiful, powerful, helpful things in the world come from people who have experienced what we are going through before. So I just am really grateful for that. I want to talk to you guys forever, but I want to ask you just one more question. And why belonging? Out of all the things that it could be, like the book of love, and we're going to focus on all the stories that are about love, or the book of joy, which that would be fun. Like, I feel like Rachel would have preferred to write or preferred to illustrate the book of joy than painful, experiencing pain along the way. Why belonging? Like, why does it matter? And what are you guys hoping is different about people? Like, how do you hope that this book impacts people?
Rachel, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think that if we can give something to ourselves and to our kids, it is a vision of the world and the people in it where everyone does belong. That, to use some lingo, dualism is really destructive, I think, sometimes. And being able to sit in the middle with the hard stuff, the paradoxical stuff, to say that it all belongs, I think is so counter to the message that maybe many of us received as people, as humans, as Christians, that like there's good and there's bad, and you need to get the bad stuff as far away from you as you can. And you need to keep the bad people away from you as far as you can. Rebuke it in the name of Jesus. And that our bad feelings, our hard feelings, those do not belong. Like, everything needs to be good and fluffy and sacred. And I think we need more of a sense to give to our children ourselves that all of it belongs and that all people belong. And we need some serious healing of this sort of deeply destructive us versus them thinking. And it can be tied so tightly to these scriptures in I think a way that's just so contradictory to the original message of Jesus and all of these stories. And yeah, I think if you go with the book of love or the book of joy, it can be easily like stay up here with like just love people, but then like in the subtext, like, the people like us. There's that. And then also I think like if you teach your child and yourself to love yourself and have belonging for, all of the guests in Rumi's guest house, then you can have more spaciousness in your own life for the other people that don't seem to fit or seem to be too painful or too strange or too different from you. So, yeah, that's why it really matters to me as someone who really wants to be an in-betweener and a bridge builder between people who feel like they don't belong and people who do. Like, belonging is I think what the world needs more of.
Oh, Rachel, good one. It's funny how it means so much to both of us, but I come at it from such a different perspective, though, which is funny. I didn't realize you would say it in that way. For me, it's more like the nerdy research side of it kind of carried that message of belonging for me. To use some big Bible researcher language, atonement theory is at the heart of a lot of our theology here in America. Atonement theory, the word atonement, at one-ment. We're all aware that something like there's God, there's the divine, there's this thing, and then there's us. And we're not the same. It seems like we should be, but we're not. Like, I think everyone can agree on that. Our theological differences, we all agree that there's God and then there's us, and there's something that we're not the same. And atonement theory at one-ment is the idea of like, how do we become the same? And to me, belonging is the only word that captures what we're all longing for. We all long to belong with anyone, but ultimately with God. I want my kids to know that the story begins and ends with belonging. That the reason they don't feel like God, that there feels like there's something different between them and God, is not that anything that they've done. Getting back to like, they're not loved for what they've done or haven't done. They're loved because of who they are. And what gets in the way is that they don't believe that. What gets in the way is that none of us actually fully believe that we belong with God and that we're loved by God and we're delightful to God. But when we see God claiming Jesus, the moment where Jesus is baptized, John the Baptist baptizes him, and this light comes down like a dove and rests on Jesus, and God speaks over Jesus, he says, "This is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased." So he claims his belonging. This is my beloved son. He says that he's loved, and he says that he's pleased with him, not in like, oh, good job. But that word pleased is more like delightful. He is delightful to me because of who he is. Another big word, but participation theory, the idea that we as image bearers of God and filled with God's Spirit, that we claim that the same way that Jesus claims that, like that means that that's true of all of us. I think that Rachel and I are ultimately saying the same thing, that the message of belonging is so important, and the hermeneutic of belonging that we've written all of these stories from is rooted in some pretty deep biblically theological concepts of atonement. And where maybe people would disagree is somewhere along their journey what atonement means to them. But ultimately, what we're all longing for and what we're all hoping for is belonging. The means by which we achieve that belonging, maybe that's what we disagree about. But when we start with the message of belonging, I think that's the best way to equip our kids to live loving, Jesus-like lives. And if the idea of being a Christian is to be a little Christ, to be a little Jesus, the only way to love people the way that Jesus did, I think, is to be so secure in your own belonging that in the idea that everyone does belong, that there's no idea of, you don't have any concept of an other. You can't other people when you believe that everyone belongs. And if you want to love people like Jesus did, you can't other them. That isn't something that he participated in. You asked like what we hope people will take away from the book. I hope that kids and their caregivers take away the idea that the table of God is long, and that anyone who's trying to convince you otherwise is either afraid and is living out of their fear, or has a vested interest in keeping that table exclusive. And that's not, I think, someone who could be trusted. For too long, I think this concept of belonging has kind of been a goal that we've been taught to work towards. But if the biblical narrative starts with belonging and blessing and ends with belonging, blessing, and along the way is telling the stories of all these people who are struggling to believe that, then I want our kids to see that they are participating in the human experiment in the same way that the people in the Bible did, but that undergirding all of it is this idea that we do belong with God, and that when we believe that, that's when we're like Jesus.
I'm so just proud of you guys. I am so, I can't remember if we were already recording when I said this, but when I got, you guys sent your Kickstarter copies out in the last couple of weeks. And Marri, you were like, Steph, I have yours. What do you want me to do with them? And I was like, put them in the mail and send them to Spain. I will Venmo you. And you're like, okay. And when I opened it, I just like put my head down and wept because I knew, because it's so beautiful, and because I knew how much pain and love and time and effort and study and faithfulness and so much went into this book. And because I believe so strongly that so many beautiful things are going to come from it in my own life, in my kids' life, in our family, in all the, like, in the world. And I really, truly was like ugly crying. And my girls are going, Mommy, what's wrong? And I had my hands over my face and I just went, I'm just really proud of my friends. And it just is true. You guys have done a beautiful work and I'm so grateful for it. And I just can't wait to see what God does next with it. Thanks for coming. Thanks for being here at Girls Night.
Thank you, Steph.
Thanks for having us, Steph.
This was wonderful.